What works? A wheel and a wall.
The wall salesman meets the resistance at the border.
We will meet lies and hate with the truth and a vision for the future.
Tonight, Beto and Trump and negotiations over what could be another shutdown over Donald Trump's wall.
I will take the mantle.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In just a little bit, President Trump will be touching down in El Paso, Texas. That's the city that he lied about in the State of the Union not even a week ago, falsely claiming it used to have extremely high rates of violent crime. And there, he'll hold a rally to deliver the same old shtick he has been doing for 4 months. During which time, we should note, he has managed to torpedo his approval ratings, do a political faceplant in the shutdown, and convince people in the middle that actually the Democrats are better on immigration. So now, with only 3 days to go until another deal or another shutdown, Trump is going back to the border. And this weekend, blessedly, for once, a rare moment of complete, total clarity and candor about what this entire standoff is all about. Rather than the fake statistics, rather than the lies, rather than the lurid, gross, made-up stories stolen from movies about women with tape over their mouths, the president just came out and said what it's about, what it's always been about, what it's about for Steve King, what it's about for Steve Bannon, what it's about for Stephen Miller, and what it's about for President Trump, what it's about for his base. This is what the president tweeted on Sunday morning. Gallup poll, open borders will potentially attract 42 million Latin Americans. This would be a disaster for the U.S. We need the wall now. Not criminals, not illegal immigrants, not human traffickers, not drug dealers. No, Latin Americans. That's the problem to the president. Latin Americans. And that is the reason that you cannot really negotiate with the president, because the fundamental thing that he doesn't like, that his base doesn't like, is that these people, Latin Americans, as the president calls them, are in the country. I mean, here's the president's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, back in March of 2016.
Isn't the beating heart of this problem right now, the real beating heart of it, of what we got to get sorted here, is not illegal immigration, as horrific as that is, and it's horrific. Don't we have a problem? We've looked the other way on this legal immigration that's kind of overwhelmed the country.
That's it. That's what it's always been about. And now we're getting closer to yet another shutdown for exactly the same reason as before. The president made a promise that Mexico would pay for a ridiculous, unpopular border wall that they're not going to pay for. And he will shut down the government if he doesn't get the money for it. Nothing has changed, and only days before the next deadline, it's unclear we're any closer to a deal. Joining me now, Julia Ainsley, NBC News national security and justice reporter, and Victoria DeFrancesco, lecturer at the University of Texas LBJ School of Public Affairs and an MSNBC political analyst. Julia, let me start with you. Where are things right now in the negotiations?
They don't look good. It seems in the last 48 hours, the prospects of trying to reach a deal by the Friday deadline have become even more dim. And it's weird, Chris, because the debate has really changed. We used to talk about the wall. Now it seems that Democrats are willing to give at least a much smaller fraction of money for some kind of border security package. And instead, the debate is over beds for ICE detention space on the interior. Let's be really clear about what that is. That is not for immigrants who are crossing the border illegally. If you were worried about those 42 million Latin Americans President Trump is talking about, that's not what this is. These are people in the interior of the country, often people who have lived in the United States for a long period of time, some visa overstays, people who are arrested and then they're held in ICE custody before they are deported. And in this case, Democrats want to cap the number of beds, in other words, limit the amount of space they have to hold people in ICE detention to just a little over 16,000, because they want to limit the president's ability to put people in that ICE detention and to deport them if they're non-criminal. And they think that by putting that cap on it, he'll have to focus on the hard criminals like President Obama did at the end of his presidency.
Victoria, what do you make of the president sort of coming out and saying what he said about, I mean, first of all, the open border stuff is sort of nonsense, and the number is not really right or impossible to project. But what do you make of that in its centrality, what the president's doing down at the border tonight, what he's doing in the last shutdown and maybe in this next one?
Well, it's about the red meat, Chris, in terms of going to his base. He's in a safe space. He's in a rally, and he's saying to his base, look, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm here. We're going to build the wall. These Democrats, you know, they're trying to get in the way, but we're ultimately going to do it. But what's so frustrating from, you know, an understanding of immigration is that when he talks about all of these 42 million Latin Americans coming over, is he completely ignores the fact that immigration is about push and pull factors, and that the United States has some very healthy pull factors, especially in terms of employment at both ends of the economic spectrum, in terms of our high-tech industry and in terms of our low-tech, in terms of farm workers needed to pick our fruits and vegetables, folks needed it in our construction industry, and the E-Verify solution, one that would be very low cost and very easy to implement, is completely absent from this discussion. But it's a lot easier for President Trump to villainize the 42 million Latin Americans and persons of Latin American descent, of which I am one, than actually delve down into the real issues of immigration push and pull factors.
So, Julia, so when you talk about the border funding package, right, so they're down to something like less than $2 billion. It's unclear how they're going to massage the fencing or not fencing. Republicans are claiming that Democrats have sprung this on them, the bed cap, at the last second. But having reported a bit on it, and you have as well, it has been something that Democrats have been talking about throughout this entire process.
Yes, they've actually even been talking about this during the 2016 campaign. I remember reporting on ICE raids. Some Democrats were really critical of even Obama's plans to raid. At one point, he was the deporter-in-chief before he set up these priorities. And even with those priorities in place, Hillary Clinton used to criticize the mass arrest of immigrants that would make them feel unsafe in their communities and force them underground and not have them cooperate with law enforcement. So this idea has actually been put in place for a long time. This hasn't been sprung on them at the last minute. The one thing I will point out, though, is that Democrats right now, what they're trying to do is use the power of the purse because they don't have the power of the White House. When they had President Obama in the White House, he could reprioritize, and he said that ICE should only go after the most serious criminals. And we've seen a shift since 2016 to the last fiscal year. When you go back and look at the data, the number of non-criminal immigrants in ICE detention has risen. It still only makes up a little over 10% of those people, but even the criminals aren't as serious. They're not people who pose national security threats. The number one conviction or charge of people in ICE detention who are about to be deported is a DUI. Right. Under that, it could be a nonviolent traffic offense or simply entering the country again illegally. So all of this to say is, no, this is not new from Democrats, but this is them trying to use the power of the purse to try to force these priorities when they're not in the position in the White House to do that through an executive action or, you know, God forbid, pass legislation on all of this.
Victoria, what do you think the rhetorical effect of the president's arguments about this, and he's back again today in El Paso, have been on people's understanding of the issue, of the politics of immigration more broadly?
Right. Well, he's simplifying the issue of immigration, and he's also confusing immigration and illegal immigration with our refugee and asylee system. So the caravans have been in the news over the past couple of months because we have seen large numbers of caravans coming to our southern border. But these are folks who are coming to seek asylum, to apply for the asylum process. They're not coming over here to sneak over illegally.
Right.
In some instances, we do see that because folks are so desperate. They see the wait times going into 6, 7, 8 months where they might wager across the border. But these are folks who are in a totally different category than the quote-unquote bad hombres. They want to come over and make their case. So it's very easy for President Trump to say they're all undocumented immigrants, they're all illegals, but the devil's in the details here and really understanding these are asylum seekers.
We should note that at this moment, Beto O'Rourke and a bunch of community leaders are having a sort of counter rally in El Paso, where they're sort of putting an anti-wall demonstration together. It's a city that's part of this binational community that has been extremely opposed on the whole to Donald Trump's immigration agenda, to his rhetoric about the border. That's true of elected officials there I've spoken to, the current member of Congress, Beto O'Rourke, who used to represent it, the mayor, and so forth. Julia Ainsley and Victoria DeFrancesco, thank you both. Really appreciate it.